Hi there. Thanks for taking the time to watch our session video today. My name is Jennifer Linares, a Senior Program Manager at Strategic Impact Advisors, or SIA for short. Today, we're going to be walking you through some of the research that Grid Impact and SIA have conducted to support the financial services for the poor team at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, as well as some of the resulting resources that came about this work. Although this work was completed in collaboration with the FSP team, the research, tools, and resources that we've developed are available for any development actor or any organization working in women's economic empowerment and financial inclusion or digital development to use. Though the majority of this work was completed in 2022, and many of you may already be familiar with it and may have already used some of the resources, we recently finished updating some of our research and the resources developed based on the 2021 Findex data and have created some new resources that are now available. Before we dive into some of these updates and changes, we'd actually like to start with an overview of our work for those of you watching who may not be familiar with it. There have been three primary goals of this work. The first goal was to examine a list of 35 barriers inhibiting women's access and usage of financial services, and to build an evidence base around them. The second goal was to determine which barriers are most resonant to different segments of women in different markets. And we'll go over the segment definitions in a couple of slides. The third goal was to make recommendations about the kinds of interventions, programs, and activities that might help remove, mitigate, or address these barriers so women can have access to and use a range of financial services that best fit their needs. Part of this work has been to support the FSP team at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation by making sure they're focusing on the right barriers to achieve their WEEFI 2030 vision and strategic goals, which are shown here on the right. In general, the overall goal of this work is to help both the FSP team and the wider industry in better understanding the key barriers to WEEFI in their markets and potential mitigation strategies by equipping them with data, evidence, and resources. As part of this work, we've developed numerous tools and resources that are free to use. We'll show you how to access all of the resources towards the end of our presentation, but this slide provides an overview of some of the key resources developed. The Barriers and Opportunities Analysis is a comprehensive spreadsheet that contains evidence and data around the 35 barriers. The Exemplars and Enablers Reference Guide provides information on interventions and programs that have shown success in addressing the barriers women face and accessing and using financial services. We also created a diagnostic tool which serves as a checklist that any organization can use to determine important barriers to WEEFI in a specific market. The tool also provides guidance on a suggested sequencing approach to resolve the barriers. Now we're going to move into some of the definitions, starting with the barriers and barrier categories. The 35 barriers are grouped into 8 categories shown here. The categories are prerequisites, accessibility, cost, social norms, information availability and capability, product and service quality, human resources, and consumer protection. These next 2 slides break down the barriers included in each category. You'll notice that these barriers are demand-side focused. So some of the barrier examples include mobility constraints such as legal curfews and norms, lack of peers, family, network, who use digital financial services, barriers such as digital literacy and financial literacy, and barriers including cost. Moving on to the segmentation model. The FSP team worked with Mathematica on building a segmentation model based on the 2017 Findex data, which has now been updated based on 2021 Findex data. The model created 4 segments defined by specific criteria within the Findex questionnaire. There are 4 segments, each of which sit at a different level of inclusion. Here, we have the detailed definitions of each segment. Segment 1, excluded and marginalized, are the women who do not have accounts, who have not yet conducted certain transactions in the past year, and either do not have a source of income or cannot access financial services, but they do not because they do not have a phone and financial institutions are too far away. Segment 2, which are excluded and high potential, are women who do not have an account, but they either have conducted certain transactions in the past year or have both an income source and can access financial services because they do have a phone and financial institutions are not too far away. Segment 3, included and underserved, are those women who have accounts but haven't conducted more than one type of advanced transaction in the past year. And finally, segment 4, included and not underserved, are those women in a market that have accounts and are using more advanced transactions. Using the segmentation model and our list of barriers and evidence, we were able to match barriers that may be more relevant for each segment. This slide shows the barriers that we identified as being relevant across all 4 segments. You'll see that the entire social norms category is here because we believe that these are relevant across all segments and should be considered cross-cutting. Based on our analysis, we find that barriers for segments 1 and 2 were more focused on categories like prerequisites, such as phone and ID access, cost, access to points of service, and information. For segment 3, many of the barriers from segments 1 and 2 remain the same, as can be seen where we move to this slide, but there are additional barriers that are relevant for women in segment 3, which include barriers related to consumer protection and product and service quality. Using the segmentation model and Findex data, we were able to identify several demographic characteristics of each segment, including their education levels, mobile phone ownership, rates, ages, and employment sectors. We have this data for both 2017 and 2021 in 9 FSP-focused countries, which are Bangladesh, India, Tanzania, Uganda, Ethiopia, Kenya, Nigeria, Indonesia, and Pakistan. We'll show you a snapshot of this analysis, which is intended to give a more nuanced insight into barriers affecting specific groups of women in these 9 markets. Here, we use Bangladesh as an example. This slide shows the segmentation breakdown of women in each segment, comparing 2017 and 2021. We can see that the large segment actually switched from segment 1 in 2017 to segment 3 in 2021. A key insight that emerged when we were updating this data for these 9 countries, based on the 2021 Findex, is that now 7 out of 9 FSP countries have segment 3 as the largest segment, compared to 5 countries out of the 9 in 2017, which could mean that the wider industry needs to shift focus from account ownership to building more regular and active usage. This slide compares the demographic breakdown of women in each segment in 2017 and 2021. We can look at the primary employment sector, leading education level, and percent of women under the age of 35 for each segment. Changes in women's mobile phone ownership were also evident from 2017 to 2021. Phone ownership rates actually increased for segments 1 and 2 and decreased for segments 3 and 4. Here, we have the gender gap in mobile phone ownership based on the 2021 Findex. All segments have a pretty significant gap of over 10%, with segment 4 having the largest gap of 18%. For each country, we also took the leading segment and matched it to the barriers that may be more relevant for that specific segment. In 2021, segment 3 was the largest segment in Bangladesh. And this slide highlights the barriers that we deem to be more relevant for women in segment 3 on a global level. This slide offers a more nuanced list of barriers that may be more and less relevant for women in segment 3 in Bangladesh specifically, based on the 2021 Findex and other available data sources. For example, Findex data shows that only 2.8% of women in segment 3 in Bangladesh received wage payments through a mobile phone, and an even lower number received wage payments into a formal financial account, which means there may be a gap in the market in terms of products that are meeting women's needs, or there may need to be better communication around products and services. Again, this analysis is available for the 9 FSP focus countries for both 2017 and 2021. All of the resources and tools that we mentioned throughout this presentation are available for free for anyone to use and download on the microsite. We've just added some new resources onto the site, which we'd like to walk you through now. I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Deanna, who's going to walk you through the microsite.
Hi, everyone. My name is Deanna Finelli, and I'm a program manager at SIA, and I'm going to be walking you through the tools and resources that Grid Impact and SIA have developed as part of our analysis of barriers to women's economic empowerment and financial inclusion. So all of the materials live on a microsite. You can access the site by going to gridimpact.org/WEEFI. I believe the link to the site will also be posted in the description box below this video, so you can also access it that way. Like Jen mentioned in her presentation, all of these tools and resources are free for anyone working in WEEFI to download and use. So I'm going to be walking you through each of the resources, and I'm also going to point out the resources that are new or have been updated. So we have several items on this site that went through a refresh or an update with the 2021 Findex data from the World Bank. So even if you're familiar with this site and you've used the materials before, there may be some updates that you'll want to be aware of. So starting at the top of the site, we have two resources called Barriers and Exemplars Analysis. Both of these resources include our comprehensive barriers evidence mapping, as well as our exemplars analysis, where we identified interventions, programs, and activities that have been proven to address barriers to women's economic empowerment and financial inclusion. These decks also include the more nuanced barriers analysis of the 9 FSP focus countries that Jen gave us a preview of in her presentation earlier. You'll see that one of the resources has 2017 in the title and the other has 2021. So this 2017 analysis is the original analysis that our team did and published on this website last year. So if you have referenced this resource already, you've been using this 2017 resource. The 2017 deck uses 2017 Findex data, both in the barriers evidence mapping and in the FSP focus country analysis. So on the other hand, this 2021 deck is new, and it represents a more updated version of the original resource. It also includes some comparisons between 2017 and 2021 in the FSP focus country section, so you can see how things have changed between the release of the two Findexes. For example, you can see the differences around the segmentation breakdown for the 9 focus countries. So you can still, of course, use this 2017 deck, but we highly recommend using this 2021 deck going forward, since again, it is the more updated version and it references the latest Findex, the 2021 Findex. So now I'll show you what the 2021 deck looks like for those of you who may not be familiar with it. Okay, so this is what you will see when you download the 2021 deck. It is a slide deck. You can download it to your local computer to go through. The document is quite large, but it is navigable. So you can click around and navigate to different sections of the deck to make it a little bit easier. And the deck is broken down into 5 parts. We have the project overview and key learnings. We have the barriers and opportunities analysis, enablers and exemplars, and then we have the barriers annex and the exemplars annex. So I'll show you kind of a quick overview of these last 2 sections, the barriers annex and the exemplars annex, because these contain the more comprehensive analysis that you can use in your work. So if you click on the barriers annex in this table of contents, you will be directly brought to that section of the deck where you can then read all of the barrier-specific information. So if you go to the next slide, you'll be brought to the complete list of barriers. And from here, you can click on any barrier and you'll be taken directly to that barrier specific section of the deck. So if we click on broader legal constraints as an example, we are now brought directly to the broader legal constraints section. So for each barrier, you'll get access to all this different information and evidence. So on this first page for each barrier, you'll get a definition of the barrier, an explanation of why the barrier is important for women, relevant segments and customer journey phases, other connected barriers, and also relevant exemplars. You can see that the connected barriers and the exemplars are underlined. So that means you can click and you'll be navigated to that specific section of the deck. So this is another example of how the deck is navigable. On the following slides for each barrier, you'll be able to read the summarized evidence and data that we found that relates to that barrier. So again, this is available for each barrier. If you go to those first pages of the barriers annex, you can pick and choose which barriers you want to read more about. So you can also, again, be brought directly to the exemplars annex from this first page of each barrier. So if we go over to the relevant exemplar section, we can then click on specific exemplars that we have identified address this barrier, and then we can read about the exemplar. So for example, if I click on the TAR program, I will then be brought directly to the overview of the TAR program within the exemplars annex. So for each exemplar, you can read some background information. You can again see all of the barriers that are addressed by this particular exemplar. And if you want to go back to those barriers, you can click on any of these hyperlinks. You can see the country, the source, the stakeholders involved, the key activities, the outcomes. You can read about the design principles, the enabling environment factors, as well as some challenges and potential for scale. So again, this is available for every exemplar, and you can access this from the table of contents or from the barriers annex. So that's an overview of the barriers and exemplars deck. Again, there are 2 decks, but we recommend downloading and using the 2021 deck since, again, it is more updated. Next, we have the barriers diagnostic tool. So this is what it will look like when you download the tool. Again, you can download it to your local computer. And this diagnostic tool, it provides a checklist of questions and sources that you can use to determine barriers that may be more important in a specific market context. It also suggests a sequence in which you can approach barriers. So it starts with the prerequisites and then ends with consumer protection barriers and product and service quality barriers. So to use this tool, let me just scroll down. To use this tool, you read each question, then you visit the suggested data sources to look up data to help you answer that question for your specific market. And then you can compare your market against these benchmarking considerations to see sort of how your country fits and how your country is doing to then assess whether or not you think that this is a barrier. So for example, this first question is, what is the average income of your target population? This relates to some of the prerequisite barriers about and cost barriers. So then you can use this data source to kind of assess income levels or poverty rates in your country, and then you can figure out, are these sort of prerequisite and cost barriers an issue, or have they been resolved? Each question will also come with suggested exemplars. So you can access these exemplars in either the 2021 or the 2017 barriers analysis deck that I just showed you. And this can kind of help you get a sense of how other countries worked to address the barriers associated with this question. So again, you do this for each question, and it's broken down into 4 sections. And then by the end of filling out the diagnostic tool, you can kind of get a sense of what barriers still need to be addressed in your market and how you can go about sequencing addressing those barriers. So this tool has been updated slightly since we originally posted this last year with some new data sources and information that have come out recently in the past year. Okay, so moving on. This is a brand new resource. It's called the 2017 and 2021 Country Comparison Deck. So this deck compares the FSP focus country analysis of the 9 countries from 2017 and 2021. So in this deck, you can see how the segmentation breakdown for each of the 9 countries has changed from 2017 to 2021. You can see how phone ownership levels have changed, and you can also see how the demographic breakdowns have shifted. So I'll just scroll through this so you can see what it looks like. So we have some statistics on gender gaps for all of the 9 countries, phone ownership, and then you get into the breakdown of the comparisons for each of the 9 countries. So this is Bangladesh. On the first slide, you can see the 2017 segmentation breakdown, followed by the 2021 segmentation breakdown, and then a direct comparison of both years. You can see the demographic breakdown, comparing 2017 and 2021, mobile phone ownership, etc. So we highly recommend looking at this deck, especially if you work in one of the 9 focus countries, because there's some really interesting trends and patterns shown in here that could be helpful as you're planning your activities and interventions in these specific markets. And moving on, this resource is also new. This is our barrier definitions resource, and this list has all of the definitions for each of the barriers. So it's organized by barrier category. So it starts with the prerequisites. You can see the barriers on the left, and then their definitions on the right. So this is just meant to be a quick reference if you're not sure how a barrier is defined. Then we have just our list of barriers, very similar to the last resource I just shared, but this is just the general list, not the definitions. And again, it's meant to be a quick reference material if you need to quickly refresh yourself on what the 35 barriers were that were part of this analysis. Okay, and moving on. This resource is the barrier relevance by country handout. So this provides a list of the barriers that we deemed more and less relevant for the 9 FSP focused countries. So when you open the handout, you'll see a quick list where you can then reference the barriers for each country. So this first slide has barriers that are more relevant, and then the second slide has barriers that are less relevant. These lists are using 2021 Findex data to support our analysis. So this is pulled directly from the 2021 barriers and exemplars deck that I showed you in the beginning. So if you want to see the explanation and the justification for these choices, you can then reference the 2021 barriers and exemplars deck. If you want to see this analysis that we previously conducted that uses 2017 Findex data, you can find that in the 2017 barriers and exemplars deck. Next, we have a summary presentation. So this presentation is from last year in September 2022. So Grid Impact and SIA did a Finequity webinar that introduced the barriers analysis to the WEEFI community. This isn't necessarily a tool, but it's more so a helpful quick reference and introduction to the work if you need a refresher. Next, we have this reference database in Google Sheets. So if you want your own version of this database, you can either download it to your local computer or you can make a copy of it in Google Sheets. And this database houses all of the data and information for our evidence mapping of the 35 barriers. So you see at the bottom of this sheet, it's broken down into different tabs, and each barrier category has its own tab. So we can go to the prerequisites to see what that looks like. So each piece of evidence in column B is then tagged to a particular barrier in the prerequisites category. And then we also kept track of different pieces of information for each piece of evidence. So we keep track of the source and the year, what country the evidence is referring to, what segments and customer journey phases are related to the evidence, as well as some connected barriers and barrier categories. So this is just the prerequisites as an example. Each tab looks like this, and you can find evidence for each barrier in its relevant tab. So you can use this database to find evidence related to specific barriers. You can sort and filter the sheet however you want. If you wanted to find evidence for a particular country, you can do that as well. And this is the last resource that we have on our site. It's the handout on the financial inclusion segments. So Jen, in her presentation, went through these segments earlier. This has been updated with the updated segmentation framework from Mathematica. And again, it's just meant to be sort of a quick reference material that goes into detail of the segmentation definitions. So that is just a quick overview of all the tools and resources on this site. Again, the link will be in the description of this video. And everyone at SIA and GRID just hopes that these tools and resources and materials will be useful for your work to address barriers in women's financial inclusion and economic empowerment.